Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the NPC Sports Podcast. My name is Ben, and we are back at full throttle this week with Logan and Dakota. Logan and Dakota, how are you guys doing today?
Spectacular.
I'm doing good. Doing good. Couple good days at yard work. Spread a lot of mulch yesterday, so I feel good.
It,
Feel great.
it's it seems like we got a lot of things going on, and none of them are good, at least as it pertains to Boston sports. So we got kind of a small itinerary, but a lot to talk about on that small itinerary today. We got to talk about Tatum and the Celtics on the brink of elimination, and obviously the Devers issue and its impact as a domino on the rest of the Red Sox struggles. To start off, obviously, Jayson Tatum, he underwent successful surgery on Tuesday on his Achilles, so he did not die on the operating table. So that's always positive, number one. But beyond that, he's obviously done for the remainder of these playoffs, however long the Celtics survive. Probably for the foreseeable future for next season as well. Um, I will be honest, I as great as he was playing up until that injury, you know, I don't know that his presence is going to make the biggest difference one way or the other. And by that I mean, like, I don't think that if the Celtics lose, it will be because of his absence. I think they could still lose, but I think they could have lost with him anyhow. So, as you guys are looking at what it remains of this series, however much that might be, what do you see with the impact of Tatum, and who has the most to, let's say, gain? Let's take that positive spin on it. Who has the most to gain from the Celtics standpoint?
Real quick, had you heard your note about he didn't die on the operating table? I've always found it funny that we get these surgery updates, and they are always the same. Surgery went well, and they're expected to make a full recovery. You never get a tweet that says the surgery did not go as everyone hoped, and this is going to be a long and arduous rehab. Similarly, with like when you get like NFL offseason free agent visits, like DeAndre Hopkins visited the Patriots today, told the meeting was very productive. Two sides feel good, and they'll circle back eventually. You never get like this meeting sucked and no shot. You know?
They want nothing to do with this
Yeah.
player.
Uh, so useless. Um, yeah, and to your point, Ben, about like how his impact won't the the impact might not have a huge bearing. Like I don't think like even if they come back and win, I don't. I know some people will be like, "Wow, they're better than Tatum. The net rating better without Tatum. The net rating goes up." Um, like I won't think that's the case. I think a lot of times teams do get bumps from being without their best player, and they kind of play inspired. And I think the Celtics also happen to be talented and deep enough to win without him. Title, no. But the series, like I still think they have a shot, but not a great shot just because the rest of the roster is so hurt. Um, so yeah, I mean, but overall, I mean, obviously it's a huge deal for the Celtics. But I think like my big thought on the, or main sort of thought on the series is like for as much talk as there's going to be about the future of the Celtics and Tatum and maybe like the issues with Missoula ball, so to speak. Like I don't really think the series is all that complicated, or like I don't think there need to be that many hot takes. I think it's as simple as the Knicks are better than a lot of people gave them credit for. Brown and Porzingis aren't nearly close enough to 100%. And the Celtics style of play, whereas like I think there's enough evidence that it works. They won a title. They go in deep playoff runs. I'm not saying they should change up the way they play, but it is true that they leave themselves exposed to potentially shooting themselves out of a series. That's also true, and so I think those things tend to catch up to teams that aren't truly generational. It's not a knock on the Celtics that they're not the dynasty Bulls, Lakers, or Warriors. They're still a very good team. It's just, when you are dealing with multiple injuries to key players, whether they're like really out or they're just very limited, as is the case with Brown, Tatum, and maybe Holiday, um, and you're having a bad shooting series, you just hope those things don't all converge when you're facing, or you hope they all converge when you're facing like true second round fodder. And I think a lot of people thought the Knicks were that, but they very clearly aren't. So I just think like that's my take on the series. Like I just don't think there's many hot takes to have about it. in a vacuum just because I think, the Knicks are decent and the Celtics are like legitimately banged up in a way that really has a domino effect across the roster and the matchups.
Yeah, it's the health thing, I think, because I mean the Celtics waxed the Knicks in the regular season, and the Knicks, there were flaws with them all season long. I mean they really struggled to actually put it all together at the same time. I mean earlier in the season we were talking about if the Towns trade was like a massive mistake for the Knicks. So I think there is a level of like they are overperforming. We probably didn't give them enough credit for the overall talent. This is one of the most bizarre series I've witnessed because prior to Monday night, the Celtics had dominated like 10 of 12 quarters probably, and I felt no confidence that they would win the series just because of the backbreaking ways that they had lost. And I think that the losing Tatum now, I think does them in. It would not surprise me if they go quietly tonight and then that's that. And then you start looking to the offseason. I mean, when you have to start playing Horford more than Porzingis, Porzingis is not right. By his own admission, he's not right. And that is a massive change from last year. And so you've already lost Tatum. Your other star player, Jaylen Brown's Jaylen Brown, but Porzingis, who's supposed to be giving you more, is clearly not right. So you're having to lean on 38-year-old Al Horford. And then, if Drew Holiday is not actually right, which is a possibility, then you're leaning on a 34-year-old who's not right. And so, who's going to step up to answer that question directly, Ben? It probably has to be like Pritchard. Like, it has to be someone who can shoot because they're not going to change the way they operate now at this point. And so they need someone who's going to shoot the lights out of the building. And it's pretty much him and Hauser that are going to be left to do that. So
Hauser's also hurt.
Right. Who's also hurt. So they've boxed themselves in.
Yeah.
They everything was going through Tatum, and it's just like they were going to be hard, even with him. They were going to be hard pressed to come back from this, and now I see no way it's going to happen. They don't have the bodies. They don't have the healthy bodies.
To answer your original question, Ben, I think the who has the most to gain. I think I would want to say Shireman just because, but I don't think he's going to play, so I don't think it's gonna be him. But like in theory, if he got more run because Hauser's hurt and now Tatum's hurt, maybe he really pops. But the answer, I think, obviously is Jaylen Brown. I just don't have faith that he's going to be able to capitalize on it because of the state of his knee. But, if the Celtics come back and win this series and they go all the way to the finals, it's probably because Jaylen Brown is incredible. So a lot of it's going to fall on him. They're not going to be carried by Derek White and Drew Holiday and Al Horford. It's going to have to be Jaylen Brown. And so, yeah, I guess Galaxy brain way of looking at it is the Celtics have the most to gain because if Jaylen Brown takes advantage of it and plays incredibly well, or other players do, maybe it makes them easier to make some of those big trades in the offseason that everybody's talking about. You know what I mean? Like
That's
maybe
like
maybe this is a way for Jaylen Brown to skyrocket his.
I think the Celtics have the most to gain.
No, I'm just saying,
Cody House.
They might have to make some big trades this offseason, and and the best case scenario for that is everybody's stock is really high. So I'm just saying,
I mean, I don't know if Jaylen Brown wants to play so well that he gets himself traded.
I think he does. I think there's always been an air of like he would rather go be a number one somewhere else. I don't know about
he needs to be saved from himself on that one.
I think the playoffs are about adjustments, and the Celtics, for whatever reason, have long almost taken pride in not making adjustments. That if things are not going well, you trust the process until the process comes back around in your favor again. And the Knicks have shown, Towns is a perfect example. Like if you watch Tatum going off early in that game, it's not all Towns, but it's a lot of Towns. Like a lot of Towns going under screens on switches, and instead of making sure that you protect the 3-point line, a lot of Towns like not being in the right position. And Tibbs and the Knicks made those adjustments. And throughout the series, I think the defense at the end was it game 2 where the Celtics ran the same play on their final 2 meaningful possessions. And the Knicks, that wasn't Tibbs, that was the players on the court making those adjustments between one play that ended in a Tatum dunk and the next play ended in a Tatum turnover. And I think at this point, the Celtics and Joe Mazzulla, they're forced now to make some sort of adjustment. And it might not be a tactical adjustment, but there's got to be some sort of adjustment now, whether it's running more of the offense through Brown and Pritchard, whether it's utilizing Pritchard more often. There's got to be some sort of adjustment now. And I think that's why I think Mazzulla and Pritchard, in a way, have the most to gain in this, because I think the Celtics were playing so poorly overall. They were being so badly coached, which is a fact, that if they had won, this was going to be Tatum's this was going to be this was going to be like Dirk Nowitzki in 2011 level effort if the Celtics won the championship this year, considering how injured they were, considering what a tactical malpractice was being put on them, and now that he's hurt, it's like, okay, you don't have that Bubby there anymore. You got to come up with some sort of adjustment or some rotational adjustment, or else you're going home.
I feel like I'm watching March Madness with these Celtics. Like, it was the same thing last year. Like, they won a title because they shot the lights out of the building. And it's like, that's really, like, you can have a great shooting team, but guys are going to go cold. Like, I've always knocked the Yankees lineup construction because 2 through 8 historically has been stacked with guys who will strike out 170 times, but they can get hot and run into it. And they get to the postseason, not everyone's lined up. I think that's what we're seeing right now, is they can't find the guy who's going to knock down shots from the parking lot over and over again. And that's all they've done to succeed, which is an oversimplification, but that is clearly what they hang their hat on. And so you lost Tatum, who has been probably the most reliable in that department for you. And then you're requiring Pritchard to step up, who the only time you've won a game is when he put up 23 points. The other 3 games, he's been largely useless. And so, this is what I mean by they've boxed themselves in. Like, sure, they might have to make, no, they can't make tactical changes, because at this point, like, what are you going to do? You're talking about philosophical changes. If you're like, they can't run everything into the paint now. like, yeah, it will probably have to go through Jaylen Brown because they have no other choice, but I have little desire to watch Jaylen Brown take 18 threes tonight.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to be reductive about what the Celtics did last year and have it be like they just shot the lights out. Like, I think they were dynamic last year in all facets of the game, and a lot of that had to do with you had a healthy Jaylen Brown who, he's scoring in the mid 30s. He's having a lot of explosive plays, and I think part of that's why, to go back to like what I mentioned at the top, like, it's easy now with all that's gone wrong and the Tatum injury too to focus on that stuff. But I just think so much of it has to do with Jaylen Brown being limited, because I don't think any of the opposing teams worry about him really beating the defenders off the dribble or making these explosive plays at the rim. And so then you just load up to stop Tatum, and all of a sudden the Celtics really don't have any way to score other than bombing away from 3. And so, like, we talk about adjustments, like one adjustment that I don't think is going to be made is suddenly doing fewer threes. I think they're going to double down even harder in this game because they have no one to get into the paint now. Like, without Tatum,
they have no choice.
It's not going to be Jaylen Brown because he's too limited. He has no explosion at the rim. So I don't know. They don't have anybody to do it now. So I think if you hate watching the Celtics take threes, I feel like tonight's game is going to maybe bring it to a new level.
They have no choice. Like, this is what they have to do. And I'm trying to find this now, what the differences in playing time for Porzingis and Horford this year versus last year. And this isn't a knock on Horford, but the fact that they have to lean on him for 38 minutes a night for a guy who's almost 40 is absurd. Like, this was something they could have safeguarded against at the trade deadline or something like that. And now it's like, all right, so Porzingis, who has been a health concern all year long, you did nothing to guard against that. So Horford, instead of being a nice boon off your bench or a guy that you can play 28 to 30 minutes a night, he has to do everything for you. And it's just like, that's not where he's at now. So fair point, Dakota. Don't be reductive. But I think that's probably the big thing then, in addition to the shooting, is the fact that their presence in the paint is completely different this year versus last year.
Both these teams,
You've got Porzingis playing 15 minutes a night.
both these teams are built around scoring 3-pointers. The difference is the Celtics are majority built around the 3-point line 3-pointer. The Knicks also take a lot of deep threes, but they also have that added wrinkle of being very, very good at generating old-fashioned 3-point plays. They have Jalen Brunson, who might be the best player in the NBA at least at his position, at generating 3-pointers through and ones. And that is, I just think, a fundamental difference between the matchups, health or not, between these two teams, is that when the Celtics are not knocking down those threes, they don't have that kind of other switch that the Knicks have where, they can shoot, but if they can't shoot, they also have the ability to go down low and get the layup and one, which is a much easier shot than a 25-footer. And that to me is kind of the difference. Both teams are built around 3-pointers. They're just built around threes in different ways and with less flexibility in getting those 3 points.
Yeah, and to go back to your longstanding despise of Joe Mazzulla, I do think, like, he I guess to invoke a baseball phrase, like, he has been a replacement level coach like throughout this.
I think that's generous, but go ahead.
That is probably generous, but I'm just saying, a common thing that people said about Gerard Mayo last year is, what does he do? I don't know if he's good or bad. Like, what does he do? And for Joe Mazzulla, unless he really is, has some secret sauce behind the scenes on defense, which doesn't seem to be the case. What does he do if what the Celtics boil down to is driving kick or iso ball? And so other than that, it's just his sort of his controversial philosophies on not calling timeouts, on sticking to all these processes. And so just like, again, I could do that. I'm not saying I could be an NBA coach, but I'm just saying, like, what does he do? I think last year you were able to sort of squint and be like, all right, he's really instilled this philosophy in them. The Mazzulla ball, like, don't be afraid of taking threes because the numbers bear it out. Like, it's going to work out for us. Just keep shooting. You can't be afraid to keep shooting. And, like, it ultimately worked out for them. But it is a bit of a house of cards, obviously, once you start dealing with guys being limited or not being healthy. And then it just becomes, how does Mazzulla adjust? And to your point, Ben, like, I don't know. He doesn't seem to have many adjustments. And yes, he has a hand tied behind his back too now, obviously, with Tatum being out. But I just don't. Yeah, like, what is his changeup? What does he go to when this starts happening? And it seems like, to your point, it is just trust the process because it'll come back around. But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen this time.
So I think back to, like, 2018? It was 2018 when Kyrie was hurt and Terry Rozier went nuts for an entire postseason. And that was one of those things where it's like, somehow Brad Stevens, like, made that work. Obviously, Terry Rozier played a big role in it, but even though they were down somebody who was supposed to carry them, they found a way to at least be passable. I don't think they'll have enough time to prove such a thing because they're already down 3-1. But I think from this point on, and this includes next season, is where we're going to see what Mazzulla actually is. Because he walked into a team that was pretty well structured already. Like, Dakota, in some ways, you probably could be an NBA coach in that situation because he pretty much was just dropped into it. The infrastructure was already there. And, you can look at
what does he do that one of the existing assistants on the Celtics bench also couldn't do?
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly valid question. I mean, that's the role. He was on the second row of the bench before he got the job. And so you look at Ime Udoka, who took the Rockets and made them, obviously hasn't panned out for them, but made them a legitimate contender in the West. And it's like, okay, you can see how someone like that is making an impact. Eric Spoelstra saw it for a while. You can even make that argument in some ways with Kenny Atkinson in Cleveland, even though they just floundered.
I think one other point I was going to make too is that, you bring up Terry Rozier, and I think the problem is, or what the Celtics perceive to be the problem is, the difference between Terry Rozier and, let's say, Avery Bradley, but the year that he had that game winner, I think it was against the Heat. Regardless, I mean, he had some good playoff games. And someone like Peyton Pritchard they clearly deemed Peyton Pritchard unplayable at a certain point in the game. Whereas if I remember right, Terry Rozier was kind of playing the whole way in a lot of those games, and they weren't so afraid to leave him out in the court. So it's like you look and you're like, maybe Peyton Pritchard could take over and he could be Jalen Brunson light, but they're just not going to play him in those. Well, now they might have to, but up until now they haven't been willing to play him in those spots because of the defense. So. Yeah.
Well, and that goes back to like that's not a tactical adjustment. That's a personnel adjustment. Right. So it's like why not try it? Like if he's gonna just run out essentially the same group, sans Tatum, and act like nothing's changed, it's like, well, then I hope they get their doors blown because they would deserve it. But all to say on the Mazzulla thing, like I think next year will be telling. He's going to have far less complete of a roster, especially if they use Tatum being gone for most of the year as an opportunity to reset some things. So, if he's really going to be the type of guy who's going to elevate the group around him, regardless of who he has, we're going to find out soon.
And I'll just say one more thing, and to kind of play off that, a lot of obviously the talk is about how the series is going to go without Tatum and how next year is going to go without Tatum. Like for this series, I'm expecting them to play well tonight. Like I think they should win tonight. I would be really. I know you thought they'll go out quietly. I'd be stunned if that happens. There are a lot of guys with a lot of pride in that team and a lot of talent, and they won a championship. Like I think they should win this game tonight. But as far as next season, listen, in some of those the rebuilding or the contending while rebuilding bridge years or whatever for the Celtics in the mid 2010s and stuff, they were putting together really good seasons and competitive seasons with much worse rosters than the Celtics will have next year if they run it back with everyone besides Tatum, which we'll have to see if that happens. But if it is some approximation of that, just no Tatum, like I still think the Celtics should be a good team next year. And if they aren't, I think that is, to your point, a huge referendum on Joe Mazzulla because they've made it work with far less than what they're in line to have next year.
I mean, the East sucks. They're going to be in the playoffs, like they still with that team, especially if Jaylen Brown is the one he's convinced himself he is, then they should at least be like a 5 seed, like anything lower than that would be a disappointment. But again, like, this is where, and I'm of the belief that of the 4 major sports, basketball is the least impactful in terms of the coach. But if he's going to have any sort of impact on the team, then you would think that keeping that team, like his first year, he kept the team at a level no one expected him to, pretty much wire to wire, even though he had the players, people thought they'd at least stumble out of the gate, and they really didn't. And so now we're going to get another test with far less star power of like, can you elevate a group that is much worse? Because we have seen that happen. Like there is recent documented history with the guy who's now the GM when he was the coach of being able to do that. So there's proof there.
It's funny you guys keep saying next season with Mazzulla because oddly enough, I mean, the Tatum injury might have saved his job for next season. I think if they lose without Tatum being injured, there's a conversation about Mazzulla's job. But now, win or lose, I mean, I don't think you can, talk about firing him when your best player, one of the best players in the NBA, got hurt.
What if they get killed tonight, though? Like, that obviously, like losing the Tatum thing, but then you're talking about one game that they lost. And like, if you were entertaining that before, and they end up bowing out in Game 5, then I would think that conversation should still be on the table.
Well, my thing is, they might know things behind the scenes that we don't in terms of when you get, real nerd basketball, whether or not Mazzulla is a viable option. But save all that, I think beyond Tatum, the baked-in excuse of Brown was really limited, Porzingis was really limited, Drew Holiday probably more limited than we realize. I think that probably would have been enough to save his job too. But to your point, Ben, it might have been close, much closer than we would have imagined.
But now you're getting into big philosophical roster things because it's like, all right, Porzingis is 29, and he's had injury problems his entire career. He's probably not going to start getting any healthier. Drew Holiday's going into his age 35 season. He's probably not going to start getting any healthier. You have Horford coming off the books. You need to decide if you want to extend him so he can play into his 40s. Go ahead, Ben.
We have plenty of time to dismantle the Celtics between now and June, whether they win or lose. So let's shelve that.
Okay.
But so this can kind of be like a segment 1.5 between these two, because I do, whether it's Mayo, Mazzulla, Craig Breslow, I think we are seeing a lesson in why you cannot hire unqualified administrators of your team. And I know in sports, when it comes to players, a lot of it is paying for future performance. With athletes, if you pay for past performance, you're going to get burned, obviously. With coaches, with executives, you can't do that. You cannot bring in people who are not qualified for the roles that they are being hired for. You need to have experience in those jobs. And Mazzulla, perfect example. You learn how to adjust to those things in game through experience. You can know the spreadsheet, and you can know what the number says about these number of shots per game and how it evens out over the long haul. But in order to know what to do when something is not working, you need experience to do that. Gerard Mayo, you can have an overall philosophy about how you're going to build your football team. But when it comes to actual things about like how you're going to structure your summer optional training activities, like you need the experience to know what you're supposed to do in those off-season things. And Craig Breslow, you can know how you want to set up the chart of your organization, that you want Andrew Bailey here and so-and-so directing this or that, and here's the position that you want, and Logan's gone. As usual, when I start making a point, Logan dips. But like when it comes to a conflict with your star player and how moving his position twice in 2 months might piss him off, like that's the experience piece that like you need to know. You need to gain that and not realize that like these are human beings here and these are egos that I'm moving around. And it's not just something where I can like conceptually put it down on like my iPad or whatever and show it off to my boss.
Yeah, and I think the Breslow and Mayo things are kind of comparable in the sense that like you assume that a lot of their inexperience they could make up for with the fact that like they've been in the game, they played, right? With Mayo, you're like, there's a lot of inexperience, but he's been around. He had time around Belichick. He played a lot. Like that has to account for something, right? And with Breslow, you'd think like, you're like, yeah, he's another one of these super nerds, and you worry about if he like looks at the team as an algorithm. But you're like, he still should be able to have the human touch and the baseball understanding necessary because he freaking played the game. And then you have a situation like this where there was such, with the Devers thing, where there was such little tact or little understanding for like the human emotions in play, and it's just surprising that it comes from a guy who played the game. And I think Devers even alluded to that in his comments. He was like, he played the game, he should know, maybe, or I think he said something like maybe it was a different game then than it is now, but he should know that this isn't that easy.
The thing that's funny is like that stuff matters so little to the players and the people that you're leading. And it's just like, we as adults, if you're managing someone or you're coaching someone or whatever, you think like, oh, you and I, we come from kind of a similar background. We know this or that. Like, I have some, they might have some built-in respect for me. No, like they just look at, like, Rafael Devers just looks at Breslow as some old guy. And like, like the Patriots just looked at Mayo as a coach. Like it's not like, oh, this guy knows where we're coming from. Like, no, these are 25-year-old people who think everyone older than 30 is an old man, and it's like, no, I don't. There's no connection here. You're just a guy.
Well,
I, so.
Well, I think maybe they maybe look up to them or respect them for that stuff when they're 0-0 or during the preseason, right? Like I remember, before the Patriots' first game, or might have been right after the first game, Gerard Mayo did some sit-down video podcast with Devon Godchaux. And Devon Godchaux's talking about, like, man, we'd run through a wall for you. We'd all go to war for you. Like, having a player or having a coach who was a player means so much, blah, blah, blah. And it didn't take too long for none of that stuff to matter, right? And by the end of the season, there was enough intel on the Patriots to know that the players truly like we're done with Mayo, right? So that stuff, and maybe the same with Breslow, or whenever you have this kind of thing, it's all good, and it all makes for easy stories and easy content and stuff when the team is all optimism's high during the preseason. But when the shit hits the fan, to your point, none of that stuff matters.
Well, it's interesting too because like as far as Breslow's concerned, he is about as far from a one-to-one comparison to Devers as you could get. You know,
Right.
like
He's a
he
swaggy
essentially
left-hander, you know.
he essentially played in a different era. He was a depth reliever who had some very good seasons. And you know, I just think about through the lens of like if I started working for a 60-year-old guy who's a newspaper lifer and I've only worked in digital media, I might be like, well, I'm glad that this guy has a lengthy journalism background, but that's about where it stops if he's only been in newspapers, you know? So I understand that from Devers' standpoint. I'll say, I mean, I've been pretty consistent on this. I've got no issues with Devers in this. I think he was right to be annoyed by them telling him to spend all off season resting his shoulder / get ready to play third. And then 2 days before spring training, sign Alex Bregman. Like, even if you think that is the right roster move, and it's obviously proving to be so, you know, I can understand how a guy who is supposed to be your franchise cornerstone would feel a little burned by that.
Hold on. I just want you might have been speaking hyperbole. You said you have no issue with Devers doing what he's doing?
As certainly, so I had more issue with his response to being a DH, but I didn't think he was necessarily wrong for feeling that way. I thought he should have just acquiesced, which he did. I think it would be easier for everybody, including the Red Sox in particular, if Devers just started taking grounders at first and saw what happened. At the same time, this is a guy that you are like, I'm not saying you should treat your franchise cornerstones like they can do no wrong and like they can walk on water. That has proven to be a very big problem in the NBA. At the same time, I think there's a certain way that you have to treat people, that you shouldn't be trying to cycle your number one player through 3 different positions within 6 weeks of the season. That means you didn't plan. Like, this is on Breslow. And that's where I most certainly agree with Devers, is it's like, what? Like, find another option. Why are you trying to make your $300 million player be the one to fix the issue that everyone knew you had in the offseason because you had an injury-prone first baseman, and go figure, he got hurt, and you have no viable option to back him up. Nick Sogard last night was the best I've seen any guy play first for the Red Sox in the last 10 days. And above all else, the thing that drives me up the wall about all of this is we've spent 8 years railing on Devers' defense and how bad he is at third base, and then suddenly this guy's supposed to be the savior at first base, and everyone's mad at him because he doesn't want to play defense. He got castigated every day for how he played defense.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I just think having no issue with him whatsoever is a tad aggressive. Like, I 1000%. If we're like building a pie chart of like who is most like who's being the biggest douche in this situation, I think Devers is less than 50%, but he's not in that pie, if that makes any sense. I do think that I yes, there's a roster construction. I think there is a fundamental. You guys don't understand nuance, so I know you guys now will say, "Oh, Ben hates Breslow because I point out specific, tangible reasons that Breslow is."
John does not understand nuance. I'm
oh
a man
my
of
god!
I'm a man.
But like I think I put the biggest, maybe not the most part of that pie on Breslow, but I think the biggest portion of that is on Breslow. I 1000% agree with you there. To say that Devers is not a big piece of that, though, like I know, but it's a team sport. You're a team player. Like the team is going to be much better, even with his questionable defense at first base, by the ability to get another bat who's not Romy Gonzalez or Abraham Toro, the lawnmower man, into the lineup. So I just don't think that Devers is not not culpable in some way for this.
I mean, all right. So there's two parties involved. So obviously he is at least culpable.
Well, there's
in
more
some
than
way.
two
like
parties.
I said,
There's multiple. Like, yeah,
sure, sure. But as we're talking about the Breslow and Devers thing, yeah, I mean, my thing is just like Devers looks like a dick because he's the only one being honest publicly right now. Like he is the only one who is saying exactly how he feels about this situation. And I feel like in the media in particular, and fans too, people so badly want candor. And then he finally gives it, and we're railing against the guy for, like, even if he acquiesced to that, he would have every right to be pissed, as he has been about DH. And he got killed the first 2 weeks of the season because he was so goddamn bad, and he finally figured it out. And now we're trying to upend it again just so you can put this guy through the ringer again. Like, why, as an organization, the guy who's supposed to be the face of your franchise, why are you doing this to him? Yeah. Why are you putting him in this position when you could have signed a $800,000 backup first baseman in December?
Yeah, and sorry, Dakota. I know. I hope you're enjoying the show. And I will say the person who is being, in my opinion, is being the least honest through this situation, and that's why I say there's more than just two sides. I think the least honest person in this situation is Alex Cora. I think Cora is just he's backing away. He does not want to get, but like I think that like you want to go way back, just as it relates to first base. Why did they not have Devers start trying to work out at first base in the offseason? Because they didn't want to piss off Tristan Casas. So he's another kind of piece of this pie that then relates into Cora and Breslow in not doing their jobs as the head of baseball operations and the manager of managing that, knowing Casas would get not quite pissed off maybe, but he would get his panties in a bunch if he saw someone else working out at his position, and now they're paying for that. So like, and now Cora is just kind of like, hey, John Henry, Sam Kennedy, you guys handle this now. Welcome to sunny Kansas City. You're absolutely right about the candor piece of it. Sorry, go ahead, Dakota.
Well, no, I think that the part about Alex Cora is like, I think it's because if he did speak honestly, it would confirm what we all know, which is that him and Craig Breslow aren't on the same page about a lot of things. So there's that. I think ultimately, like, three things can be true in this. Devers is acting like a douche a little bit. What Logan is saying is true, but you could say that about every player. It doesn't mean you should always do full candor through the media. So he's acting a little bit like a douche. Learning first base is not that difficult. It is for some guys, but a guy who played a quarter infield spot, like, it's not that difficult. I saw Mike Lowell, I think he was on Bradford's podcast, and I put stock into like players like that, and he was saying like it's the easiest one to learn, like it's not that bad. So all that's true. And then, but what also is true is that, the Red Sox handled this terribly. Yeah, obviously, like at all levels. So I don't blame Devers at all for feeling the way he does. But like, to kind of circle back to your original point about Breslow and his inexperience, Ben, I think you that stuff really shines when there's inconsistency, right? So it's like there are so many good things he's done. A lot, from trades to overhauling the pitching development infrastructure, where a lot of people focus on what's happening on the big league team, but like their talent pitching wise in the minors now. Like the narrative has completely changed from like the Red Sox can develop pitching prospects, and we still have to see these guys come up in the big leagues, but they're in a better place right now from a pitching talent through the organization than they've ever been. There are stories like, someone like Shane Drohan, who like 3 years ago was an ascending pitching prospect for them. Then he really regressed, and this was still when Bloom was around. Then last year he got picked in the Rule 5 draft, ended up reverting back to the Red Sox. He had no value. They overhauled his fastball and everything in the offseason, and now he's like back up into being a borderline top 20 prospect for them. So like he's done a lot of these really good things that I think he gets full credit for, but not having real depth at first base, not planning for that, not building into the roster clear pathways for Roman Anthony and Marcelo Meyer. We talked about this last week. Like they don't have really any logical way of getting those guys on the roster unless, if in the case of Anthony, if Devers goes to first, then that solves it a little bit. But beyond that, like you would have to either demote or trade one of David Hamilton or Ceddanne Rafaela, and you don't want to do that. And that's because they didn't think about this, I think, proactively enough in the offseason to build in pathways for those two guys. So they're just kind of stuck. So I think those are just, to your point, like, I don't know if it's an experience, if it's just people in the organization not being on the same page where, it's just not all Breslow's call. Like, I don't know, obviously, what it's like at that level of the organization, but I think regardless, a lot of that ultimately has to fall on him. And it's been inconsistent. And I think that's a reflection of when you don't have a ton of experience in the job.
A quick take. I think if Story doesn't turn things around relatively soon, we see Meyer at short and they just figure out what to do with Story. Which, for someone who doesn't understand nuance, I'm sure that take surprises you guys from me. But the thing I think that bothers me the most about the Red Sox in this situation is, in an age of baseball that values versatility, why in the hell have you told two players to just put their gloves away? They did it to Yoshida and they did it to Devers in spring training. It's just like, to the point about, like, you should have prepared for this in spring training, but you were afraid of Tristan Casas, which is just absurd to me. It's like, I don't get, like, last year they told Yoshida for no reason, just put the glove away, don't even practice defense. And then they're like, well, we have no extra options in the outfield whenever Ref Snyder's not around. It's like, yes, you do. He's not that great, but he's competent there. And it's like, we would take competency at first base. And so the fact that it was just like, they're flying by the seat of their pants almost. It's like, how could you not forecast this potential issue that's like, all right, we now have nowhere to put Devers, we have no backup first baseman, and our first baseman can barely make it 100 games a season. Like, the answer was right there. It's clumsy. It's so clumsy. And I blame Cora for the way he operates on the day-to-day, but I think a lot of this is things that are out of his control, because it's like, what can he do when he has to put Abraham Toro at first base when he's played 8 games there his whole life?
I don't know if it was all about not pissing off Tristan Casas. I think the best path for the Red Sox was having Devers either play third or DH, and then, like, trying to, like, get Tristan Casas out there and establish himself as your franchise first baseman and one of the key members of your lineup, like that. And then, you needed to play that out and see if that would work. And having him start platooning with Rafael Devers is just not a good way to accomplish that. Not to mention the fact that, like, in a world where maybe they want to look to trade him at the deadline or in the offseason, these teams do think about that stuff. If you start platooning him, you send a clear message to other teams that, you think he's a platoon player. And then they're able to go, like, well, we're not going to offer you full value for a trade. And to kind of bring it back to Devers, because we've talked about how, like, I think a trade's totally on the table. Whether it be this season, probably not, but next offseason, like, whether he asks out, like, I can see that happening, or whether the Red Sox say this thing's too toxic, I don't know. But, to kind of, again, bring it back to the Craig Breslow inexperience thing, they've shot themselves in the foot, because there probably are still teams out there that would play Rafael Devers at third base. Teams that wouldn't really care. Maybe a team like the Dodgers or other teams that are competing where they're like, we'll put him at third. We don't care. But the Red Sox have already made it easy for them to say, like, well, you say he's a DH, so we're not going to trade a package that says he's a third baseman. So they've torpedoed some of his value. And again, that sort of falls on Breslow not thinking about this stuff ahead of time. So I just think that's that's one of those things, like, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think it's just going to be a huge storyline next offseason, how this all goes with Devers, and whether or not we look back on it and say them making him a DH, hampered the return they were able to get, similar to how they shot themselves in the foot with Mookie Betts beforehand. So just obviously something to think of as the year goes on.
Yeah, the Red Sox really rolled the dice. Similar to a guy who has been known to roll the dice, or like to roll the dice in his day. Pete
What
Rose,
a segue.
He's back in baseball, technically speaking. Pete Rose is no longer persona non grata. He has been reinstated, and he will be eligible to get into the Hall of Fame, along with Shoeless Joe Jackson and Ed Chicot and the rest of the 1919 Chicago White Sox. And I think, as this pertains to the media for our Behind the Keyboard segment, is how much sports betting has influenced sports media now. And I think that this is just the latest reflection of that. Betting used to be the thing you do not speak of. Otherwise, you're gone forever. And now, even though it took more than 100 years for Shoeless Joe and company, it's something that is not verboten anymore necessarily, even if you get caught.
Yeah, I mean the reason it changed is because the leagues finally got a piece of the pie, and that's all they needed. Like everyone has a price, and you know, gambling companies were willing to meet that. I think the the rules or the change is incredibly, to use Cody's words, soft. If you're gonna ban a guy, ban him. Like, you know, I don't know about, like, do we after someone serves a life sentence in prison, do we expunge their record when they die? Like, if you think it's bad enough that this guy shouldn't get in when they're living, why are you doing it posthumously? Like, I it makes no sense to me. You're either in or you're out. And you know, Pete Rose, as far as playing is concerned, is an obvious Hall of Famer. But I just don't get the charade of, we're going to ban you while you're alive and then you die and you can be part of the consideration. Like, if you think there is a point where this person becomes a redeemable figure, then you probably should just leave them open to getting in the Hall of Fame in the first place and let the voters decide. But
that's what they're doing, though. Now it's on the voters, just like it is with steroid guys.
I know, but like,
I know that's obviously that's Manfred passing the responsibility on, which you could say is soft, to your point. But like, where I come from, it, like, and I think maybe over the last day, I think I've learned, like, I don't know enough about Pete Rose as I thought I did, because like there seemed like I've always been like, who cares? He didn't bet on the Reds. Like, it's bad, but like, was it so bad that he got banned? And then the more you read, like, you know, maybe there is a lot of reason to believe that he was, you know, not keeping things on the up and up. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I always lean towards the best players should be in, even if they're the biggest scumbag in the world. So maybe I'm on an island with that and just leave it up to the voters. But again, I don't know. The more I've read over the last like day, I'm starting to like reconsider that. Like, maybe he was that bad, and maybe like it is the ultimate cardinal sin to do betting, because you need to protect the integrity of like fans knowing the product on the field is legit. And if you start letting guys in the Hall of Fame that betray that, then it's just such a slippery slope. So I understand that, but I don't know, I'm conflicted on it. It's not a great podcast take, but I don't really know how to feel about the Pete Rose.
It's a very nuanced thing.
I tell you who is probably not super thrilled about those guys being reinstated, and it's the betting operators. It's the bookmakers. It's the ones who actually provide the betting, because the most important thing for those operators is the integrity piece. It's the belief from the customers, from the consumer, that the competition itself is on the up and up. And that is why the number one most fervent police force against impropriety in sports betting is the operators. Like, they're the ones who are monitoring all of the activity and alerting the FBI when there is untoward betting activity going on, because they know that once the fan loses trust in the honesty of the competition, then all of a sudden everything goes away. Like there's no one there. And that's why we've had so many safeguards and laws and injury reports, and all these things have become part of the rules making process of not only like the laws but also the teams. If there is a question about the integrity, it eats away. And once you eat away at that integrity, you hurt your existence. It's a question of short-term profit over long-term gain, and the leagues, through their relationship with the sports betting, have made it clear that they value that short-term gain, and allowing guys back in who have been found to bet on their games. I think that that's kind of another step in this direction of, you know, chipping away at that idea of things being authentic and on the up and up.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, you can go, Logan, because I think mine's a longer thought.
I was just gonna say, you know, I'm not a big Harold Reynolds guy, but I was watching Harold Reynolds on MLB Network talking about it, and he's like, I love Pete Rose. Like he genuinely knew the person Pete Rose and liked him, and he was still like, but gambling and the integrity of the game is such a sacred thing in this that it's like you really can't upend it. And to me, it's just like, it is insane to me that the league's got in bed with these gambling companies. I mean, you can't, they were so intoxicated by the payouts and whatnot, but it's like, if fan trust because of gambling completely wanes, that's on the leagues. Like this was, and not only because they accepted it, but because they shoved it down our throats. Because I have to get betting lines everywhere on tickers. I have to get it everywhere on a broadcast. And to me, the issue with the gambling is the normalization of it, and the fact that it's treated like there's no consequence. So, that's a bigger picture issue with gambling. But yeah, I just think that you can't take this hardline stance on it forever. And then, like, the way it reads to me is the league got bought. They finally got enough money to say, we'll look the other way on this. We'll still punish guys. But if there's really no long-term thing, like if you have a good enough career, if Mookie Betts gets popped for gambling when he's 38, but he knows when he dies, he's still going to get in the Hall of Fame, maybe he gets peace of mind from that. That's not an actual punishment, right? Like, it misses the point of the ban the way they're trying to portray it. I just think it's disingenuous.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, to go back to the whole thing about like the content side of it, and from the journalism standpoint, and I'm biased on this because I've never placed a sports bet in my life, and I don't plan on it. Like, I just don't, I don't want to. I bet on a horse race one time at Saratoga, and I won like $100, and so I'm happy with that. I'll fade it, go into the sunset with that. It's just total luck. But so like, I hate sports betting. I hate the content. I find it completely disinteresting. I find it like just pure exploitive. Like, we're talking about like exploit cinema is like Marvel movies and bullshit blockbusters that are just meant to like exploit you and for easy gain. And it's like, that's all like betting content is. It's just pure bullshit content that is
Snake
just
oil
designed.
salesman.
Yeah, just designed to hook the lowest fruit and people that are like doing all these bets, and I just don't find any like journalistic value in it whatsoever. And it just barrels us further toward like this world in which like it's just all pure garbage content, and like this reason we all got into this field in the first place is less and less valuable to the point where we get viable jobs, and it's just all this betting stuff. Like, I don't know. I don't, and I also just find it like, and so many people in media too are feeding into it and accepting it and participating in it, that I'm like, you have so many journalists or media types that are like holier than thou on so many topics and not speculating or they'll preach to you and get on their soapbox about so many things, and they'll willingly participate in something.
And then
like
let me
sports
tell you
betting.
about Prize Picks.
Yeah, and I
Right. Sponsored by
like,
Draft.
no, or you'll have, and this kind of, I was kind of going into this episode wanting to rant about another like side topic, which was like, I hate that so many sports media types like refuse to speculate on injuries. Like, we'll speculate about every other part of these people's lives, professions, everything about them, and then be like, but I know we can't say if we think it's an Achilles. I know we can't say it, but we don't want to speculate about injuries, but if it's what we think it is, but it's like they'll do something like that, and then they'll just totally participate in sports betting, which is like an
Speculative,
significantly more
by
damning
definition.
speculative practice. Like, it's
Go ahead,
I have
Logan. I know you got to hop.
I just have a quick question that I know, Ben, you could also answer. Both of you guys could weigh in on this. Whenever my recollection of like the actual content, like sports betting content that I have produced, that like we did a ton of it at Nesson. I don't remember that being like highly read content.
No.
Like I
That's the
remember
other thing.
when people were like, it's such an oversaturated market, and I remember being like, we have to do the Iran versus Turkey odds post for the World Cup, and 27 people read it, and it's like, but I'm told sports betting is this big deal, and like nothing ever gains traction.
Can I give a quick story in the spirit of behind the keyboard, because I know you got a hard out, Logan. My first job in the industry was doing the high school desk at the Boston Globe for the great Bob Holmes, who was the high school editor there.
A legend.
Yeah, and I would do that job. Logan, you did that job too, right?
Yeah,
So probably
yeah.
what I'm going to say is we would be in there on the weekends, and part of it was getting phone calls, right? And a lot of those phone calls were like a high school baseball coach calling in to give you the stat line, so you could do your tiny little story that was going to be in the Globe or put it in the Agate box score or whatever. But we also got a ton of calls from like people you could tell some dude wasted in his basement or something.
At least 80 years old and very drunk.
And he's calling and asking you like, hey, did Curry softball win today? You know, hey, did Salem State basketball, did they win today? And like they're just asking all these questions, and I'm like, you have money on Curry softball, you loser. Like, you know, and it was so blatant. It was always the same sounding guy with the same level of intoxication, you could tell, and like same, you know, probably similarly in the hole on his bets. And they would just call us all weekend and asking us about random local college sports scores to see if they hit on their bets.
I think, you know, my last thing is I want to ask a question is, if you're a player, what is the deterrent to participating in a betting scandal now? Because once upon a time it was lifetime ban. It was you lose the opportunity to make millions of dollars or whatever amount of money to play this game, to get to the Hall of Fame, anything like that. And now in relatively short order, we've had the most famous baseball player in the world get connected to a sports betting scandal that was really quickly shuffled away and placed on his translator. And now we've had the all-time hits leader posthumously get reinstated to get into the Hall of Fame. So now if I'm Juan Soto and I'm looking at this now and I'm like, wait, I'm good. I'm good enough. I'm famous enough. Like, what's to prevent me from risking my $700 million contract? Because that was once the deterrent. It's like, if you take part in this, you risk losing that. And now we've had these two things where I'm looking at, I'm like, wait a second, I'm not sure the punishment matches the crime anymore. This seems a lot like steroids, where the gain is way beyond what the possible loss is.
Yeah, I think, interestingly, I think it's actually the other side of it that I'm more concerned about is like, what is the deterrent for lower level to mid level players on a roster?
Yeah, any player, like, right? Any
they might not
especially
have a path
them.
They don't have the path probably to getting that contract or the money that they want. So the and there are
where your issue is.
There are far more lower to mid level players on rosters than there are megastars, right? And you need those players just as much as you need the stars to fill out these teams. And so, yeah, like for them, what's the deterrent? Like, you might as well, you have, and for a lot of these guys, they probably have a better shot making money sports betting than they do sticking around to see if they can somehow get a good contract.
But the thing is that those guys, the Jonte Porters and those sort of guys, they can't impact the result of entire games and or seasons the way that a Shohei Ohtani or a Juan Soto. Like, Juan Soto could not only, like, yeah, you could influence whatever guy, Bryson Stott to not hit the over on his hits, in a game. But like, you get to Juan Soto, you can impact the National League race, the division race, World Series is like, now you're talking about entire seasons that come under scrutiny.
Yeah. No, we lost Logan again.
It's always in the middle of me talking. Go ahead.
The other one point I make is, it's like, I think people always focus on what if guys are like betting in a way that they throw a game or impact the way they play. But it also could be as simple as like, if you're Keyshawn Boutte and you see like there's an over-under on Ramondre Stevenson having 55 yards, and you're like, I saw Ramondre at practice this week. I know he's not 100%. I know he's going to be splitting carries. And it's like, so for someone like that, who he's like, I'm not tanking the game, but I have enough knowledge to know, like, I should probably bet on this. But, and also like, I might not get any legitimate NFL contract because I'm Keyshawn Boutte. Like, what is the deterrent for a lot of those guys in those kind of bets? Not necessarily the most nefarious situation that we're thinking of, but just more casual stuff like I just mentioned. Like, what is there to dissuade someone from just doing that kind of bet? I don't know if there is one, to your point.
Yeah. And I mean, to be clear, I mean, you and I are very much not of the pearl clutching variety, and I think that's, if people want to come to the defense of maybe Major League Baseball or Pete Rose, like, oh, you're clutching your pearls against sports betting, all that. It's not that. If you want to gamble, if you want to bet, like, absolutely do it. My position has always been, what you do for your own entertainment is nobody's business but your own. If you feel like taking your $20 and going to go bowling on a weekend night, or you want to take your $20 and go put it on the Celtics-Knicks game, like, that's nobody's business but your own. So go for it, knock yourself out. I agree with you on a number of things, though, when it pertains to like my own money. There's certain bets that I will not make, and they just happen to be the ones that are like the most advertised and the most popular nowadays because they're sucker bets. these like extensive same game parlays, which have like the plus 700, odds that draw people in. I will never place an NBA bet like ever again. That league just has Scott Foster, Tim Donaghy, John Tate. Like there's been too much connected to it for me to believe that anything is on the up and up. And I just think that if you do spend money on an NBA bet, you are a absolute sucker. And it's not because I'm clutching my pearls thinking sports betting is bad. It's because I just think you are an idiot who needs to read the news.
Yeah, no, 100%. If I ever was going to get into sports betting, I think I would just do it for baseball because I enjoy following it on a deeper level more than some of the other sports. And like I'd like to think that like my attention toward lesser known players or narratives like might help me in some respect, but at the end of the day, like it's such a crapshoot. I just don't know if I can ever get there.
Yeah. But it is interesting because I think the media. Sports media really got in bed with this betting because they saw it as a replacement for a lot of the lost revenue from cable contracts, and I think that a lot of them are pulling back big time. Like ESPN's programming has been shut down. A lot, Fox's programming has been cut down a lot. So we'll see. We'll see if it ends up being worth it.
Yeah, them. Maybe ultimately there is a way on like a higher media or technology level to integrate this stuff into the experience. But as far as like written content, I just can't wrap my mind around how that's going to be valuable to anybody.
Yeah.
Especially, and it also just feels completely replaceable by AI, where like I can just ask ChatGPT, like, give me everything I need to know about possibly making this bet, like the requisite information. Because at the end of the day, like most betting content is just all stats based. It's trends, it's historical stuff and things you need to know. And at a certain point, the AI is going to be able to do that. So like if I was a young aspiring sports media journalist trying to get into the industry, I don't think I'd hitch my wagons to the betting side of things.
Yeah, 1,000%. All right, I think that's enough for today. I think that was good. I like that sort of talk. Congratulations to Pete Rose on his 1-day induction. I don't think it'll happen right away. I do think that there's enough crunchy old sports writers who will keep him out, but I do think as time goes on,
and congrats to Shoeless Joe. Congrats to Shoeless Joe.
Yeah,
I saw his house about a month ago.
I think you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah. That it's across from the street. It's across the street from the Greenville Drive stadium in Greenville, South Carolina. It's a cool little spot. The whole district is themed around Shoeless Joe, so maybe they'll be partying down there this week.
So he's a perfect example of. I know I already did the sign off, but like he's a perfect example of like the type of athlete who, even now, is like most susceptible to this kind of stuff. Like a guy who like couldn't read or write, like was not as brilliant as he was with the bat. I mean, he was known for not really knowing anything but baseball, and he essentially, if he did go along with the scheme, like all the evidence points to like he just kind of like went along with it because like teammates kind of like told him like, hey, this is good for you, and they may have even lied, like not giving him all of his money. They were all making like 90,000 and he got like 10,000 or something because like they were like, oh, he can't read the thing, right? So yeah, I mean he's very different from Pete Rose, who was just a lifelong scumbag and slimeball and liar. But like, yeah, I'm sure that there's a comparison to a Shoeless Joe playing right now who could be preyed on, by someone who's trying to get him to throw a game.
Yeah, and the weird thing, it's tough though because for so many people and especially players right now, like Shoeless Joe he feels like someone who didn't actually exist.
Right.
Kind of like I was having a conversation with the other day where I'm like, I think for most people, like Walt Disney is someone who didn't even exist. It's just the name of the company. And Shoeless Joe is just this thing they hear, so maybe like when you're that far removed in history that like letting him in has no actual impact. But Pete Rose is still fresh enough. And I know he's dead, but like, a lot more players now, they're far more cognizant of that and the implications of that, where I think that one does matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. All right. This is a real sign off this time for Dakota, for the dearly departed Logan. This has been Ben. This has been another episode of NPC Sports Podcast. Thanks for being with us.